Well, hey there, everyone. Welcome back to class. So we're in week 3, and week 4. I do know where we are, I think. So week 4, module 4. It's a good thing I looked at the syllabus. We're tackling the topic of non-duality. And now, if this is new ground for you, I completely understand how this might be a little bit to wrap your head around among a lot of the other topics we've talked about. It is, I think, introduced and talked about some in the Posturing book and a bit in the Chronically American book too. But what I wanted to do with this topic in particular is give it its own week, give it its own module, because it is that important to this whole idea of holism. And hopefully that makes sense as we continue down our path. But we start the week with some readings from Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation daily meditations on the cosmic egg. It's something that he refers to in our way of looking at the world. This certainly relates to non-duality, but it also has everything to do with the idea of holism. In that when we are, so here's the cliff notes of it, and hopefully you will read all of the readings so that you will get a further in-depth appreciation of this. But most people think of themselves as, especially when we're young, as being the center, and that this is all about me. And I think the young people of the world get a bad rap for that, but that is how we all start. And as we grow up and grow older, we recognize that there are other people like me, and other people who have interests like me, that other people who perhaps look like me, they act like me, they live like me, they're educated like me, and we develop these groups. So we move from something, as Father Rohr calls my story, into something a little bit larger called our story. And that's where most people, according to Rohr, that's how they live their life. Most people start off with my story and they move to our story, which is moving beyond yourself into something larger. But that's about where people, as far as people go. And the downside of that is, as you can imagine, that's where we, put these blinders on to see the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, and some of you may remember Paul Harvey, a radio guy, and told great stories, and he'd get to the end and he'd say, and the rest of the story. So anyway, the rest of the story is there's something much bigger beyond our story. There is the story, as Richard calls it. And you could imagine how things like racism develop out of something like moving from my story to our story, and you're really protective of that. And so anything that's outside of our story is then unacceptable. Would be then, this is where the connection is to dualism, is bad, right? Anything that is like me is good. Anything that is not like me is by default bad. And we give these labels and so forth. And that is, in a nutshell, what dualism is that we see either or, that if you are on one side, say Republican or Democrat, in our story, that the other side is by default the enemy. We see it all the time in sports, unfortunately. Youth sports, as all of our kids have kind of grown up through, has gotten a little bit out of control, because we as a society are seemingly more, and maybe we're just aware of it, dualistic than in the past. And youth sports is one of these things that calls this out, where you have these 8-year-old kids that are out there on the soccer field, and the parents are going bonkers on the side because you got the good guys and you got the bad guys, and everybody wants their own child to be on the good guy side, but we forget that there's someone just like you stand on the other side of the field who wants their child to be the good guys too. Super Bowl is coming up, and same thing. I mean, whether you're a Chiefs fan or a Niners fan, somebody's going to lose that game. Somebody's going to win that game. And if we look at it in just our story, then it's hard for us to recognize the full story or the story. So we start with the cosmic egg, so that I love that whole visual and how it's explained by Richard, that it just explains so much of what we're trying to get to with holism. If we can move ourselves out to this idea of the story, that there's something way beyond me, there's something way beyond the people who I see like me, and to be able to accept all that is out there, we're making a lot of progress towards this notion of wholeness and holism. So then more specifically, and I think just as a side note, I think on the Blue Line side, it may have a little to either read this or that, but it's both, because there's reading about the cosmic egg and then also reading about non-dualism. So I need to go in and fix that, but just make sure you click on both of those links and read those. But the other piece about this is talking about dualism, and in the introduction to this module, there's a bit more explanation in there too on what this looks like. But we all, I think, seem to have some necessariness to having a dualistic mind. And I hope that you've gotten some appreciation for, after reading the posturing book, that there's more than one way of knowing, and most of us only consider our thinking mind as our only way of knowing. But there are other ways of knowing also, and when we just stick to our logical, reasoning mind, it's hard for us to move beyond dualism. It's hard for us to see things as a both and rather than an either or. And so I hope that the posturing book at least set the table for considering that there is something greater beyond our thinking minds of how we know what we know. And I always like to explain or use the example of how do you know that your mom loves you? It's not your rational mind. There's something more to it than that. There's something that you can feel. There's a heart way of knowing, a heart level of knowing. There's a body way of knowing that you can feel. So those are just examples I think that hopefully we all can relate to. If you have ever loved anything at least one time in your whole life, you know what I'm talking about. And for those of us that are lucky enough to have kids, that there's a way of knowing about love that is unexplainable in your head. And pets can do the same. Nature can do the same. When you are, June, let's just pick a date, June 25th, and you go outside and it's, a nice 72 degrees, and you're out in the middle of nowhere and it's pitch black, and you look up at a clear sky and all you see are more stars than you can even imagine. There is something there that is beyond your mind way of knowing, that hopefully touches you in a way that you can't explain. The same way of standing at the ocean, or being in a forest, or looking at the mountains. There are things that we just can't comprehend in our minds. And so I say all of that for you to try to move beyond your rational thinking to try to explain all that is. And it's okay to not. explain, to not be able to explain. That is also part of non-duality, is an acceptance that not all things can be explained. So the notion of non-duality moves us to a space where we get beyond this individualism that is so pervasive in our culture. And just as a side note, if you're unaware, the Surgeon General, that our current Surgeon General, has made a lot of efforts to try to draw some light to this issue of loneliness that we have in the U.S. amongst our adults and children. And it doesn't have anything to do with you living with people or not. It's a loneliness that is felt deep. And it has been, as he calls it, an epidemic where it is leading to so many other health issues, and both physical health issues, mental health issues, emotional, and so forth. And that much of the research on that points back to this idea that individualism is such held in high regard in the West, in our country. And think about it from a school standpoint. And when you're a child, everything has a grade on it. Everything has points associated to it when you're in school. When you're in sports, everything has a level of measurement to it. And so you develop this idea that I have to be all of this. I have to be smart. I have to be good at sports. I have to be whatever other things that go along with that. And so this notion of individualism is pervasive because it makes me feel like I'm worth something. And that, unfortunately, as we're starting to now see, is very isolating and lonely, and leads to some significant health issues, and not in the least, but depression and anxiety. And as we talk about a lot in this class, is chronic stress. So that is certainly connected to both of those conditions, but then also heart disease and cancer and all of all the other physical ailments that we experience. But if we can then find a place to move beyond this individualism, if we can, as Father Richard talks about in other writings, where we all start in dualism, we all try to make sense of the world by categorizing and labeling. And that it is certainly necessary. It obviously is necessary. It's hard for us to, know how to drive a car if we can't differentiate what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. So we need to have some level of dualism and be able to, differentiate in our lives. It can't all be, this all mushed together and just have this mushiness that has no form to it. That doesn't work either. But, thinking about our lives when we were kids, I used to watch Sesame Street when I was a kid, and they had this, great song that I still ran through my head when I was in pharmacy school taking tests, when they're multiple choice tests, that, one of these things is not like the other. And two of these things are kind of the same. I mean, that was the jingle. How do you like my singing? But, it's meant to teach young people how to differentiate what looks different between these blocks. Are they round? Are they square? Are they yellow? Are they blue? And so we are, imprinted with this way of figuring out the world by differentiating. And as this moves forward into, so let's just pick on our education system, it gets more intense. And then all it is about differentiation about the content, but then that then also transfers over into differentiation about who I am as an individual, and comparing that to who others are as well. Happens in sports, happens in music, happens everywhere, happens in politics. So So then we are on this, everything is about a competition. It's how I can level myself greater than the next person. So then something is explainable about me and who I am. And that only makes sense, in the dualistic mind, that is the way to go, because then I get patted on the back. Good job, Tom. You did a great job on that exam, or you did a great job on that, basketball game or whatever it was. So you must be all that. And so then you get this ego thing going, and that's how you identify yourself. So getting back to this cosmic egg, it is, this is my story. This is who I am. I'm very protective of that story, because that's what gives me structure. That's what gives me an identity. And I protect that at all costs. And that's why I feel bad. That's why I get defensive when something runs counter to that, when I'm criticized, when I get a bad grade, when I don't play well, when my friends don't like me, those types of things. And so we have a hard time with that, because there's ultimately protecting that. And again, the same thing happens when something happens to our story too. When our political party loses, when my school loses, when something runs counter to something that I am very invested in, and we are unable to see beyond that. Okay, so that's how we make our way through the first couple of decades of life, and for most people that continues on well into the older age, and for some people, unfortunately, that's how they live their whole life with this dualism. They're unable to see a larger world beyond that. But I really love the language that Richard Rohr uses, in that he talks about moving into the second half of life. And it doesn't have anything to do with age. But it's when, because some people can move into this very early in life through some great suffering or great love. Some people move into this middle age. Some people never, move into it maybe when they're just, ready to pass from this life. But it is this recognition that there's the story out there. There's something much larger that transcends me as an individual. It transcends me as, a professor at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. It is a larger connection of me to the rest of everything. And that is moving into this sense of unity. Sometimes people refer to it as unitive consciousness or non-duality. But it's moving beyond the idea that it's an either or that the world is binary, that there has to be a separation between this and that. And so then now so much has been written and talked about this idea of unity and unitive consciousness, of this recognition and this experience that I am part of something much bigger than me. And so that's why I feel like this deserves its own module in this class, because this notion of holism, I don't think anyway, can be understood without some sense of non-duality. Now I will, I think it's important to say that living in unitive consciousness is not something that's practical, to just move into this space and just plant yourself there and you're there forever. Moving into the second half of life means that you always wax and wane with this feeling of, I'm moving a couple of steps forward in how I can understand that I'm part of something grander than me, but then I get pulled back a step back into this separateness and this, where I see myself as separate and superior and ego-driven and back into the dualism, and there's, either this or that, or there's separation rather than connection. And so I think we go through life in that way, that we certainly need to have this ability to make separations, because all of our jobs or life decision, many of our life decisions depend on our ability to do that. But at the same time, if you can have a perspective of community and unity, I love that two words, come, together and unifying together, the community whole aspect there. But if we can have some sense of how we are part of that too, then we can better do both of these things at the same time. So we have a foot in both sides, because both sides matter. And here's where you get into non-duality. Both sides are necessary. Where we have either this or that are both necessary. Like saying suffering and healing are both necessary. Coming to terms with that is challenging for most people, because it's an age-old question. Why do people suffer? Why does God allow people to suffer? Well, there may be some necessariness to that. And as many have said, it is only through great suffering where we come to great understanding and great peace and great joy. And in some ways, that's a conduit there, that there's an experience there that can't be ignored. And it's as such a, at least suffering anyway, is such a part of the human experience, that there is some necessariness to that. So moving into a space that says all things that hurt we should get rid of, and all things that are give me joy should only be those, that's missing the whole point of non-duality. They're both there. They're both necessary. It's non-duality is an acceptance of what is. And it doesn't mean that there's a complacency with it. It doesn't mean that you say, well, there's people who live on the margins and then that's just the way it is. They just, there's just some people there. It doesn't mean that. It means that you are getting an understanding of what is yours to do, and that you recognize the injustices and take the steps to alleviate suffering. But at the same time, the same time, you have an acceptance of all that is. Those are really difficult concepts to wrestle with, but that is a movement towards non-duality. And so as we keep moving our this class forward on holism, particularly from the sense of a leadership side, where you would, as a leader, recognize that the world just isn't black and white. It's a whole lot of gray in between, and have some sense of acceptance of that, while at the same time knowing what is yours to do to make life as good as it could be, is I think an important leadership quality. And then looking at it from a wellness, well-being side of this acceptance of what is, has a tremendous impact on chronic stress, and moving away from individualism and not forgetting the individual is important for our own mental health and physical health as well. So that's the non-dualism in a nutshell. I'll make one other comment here, because there's a lot of really good stuff that comes up in your video posts and in your comments. It's about the practicality of all of this stuff. How do I put this stuff into motion? How do we make this work for my life? And what I would say to that is, don't be in a big hurry, because this moves at a pace that is usually not in the same, not synced up with our impatience that we have as we want to move beyond and make things all better and not be stressed and have this sense of non-duality, but at the same time this action that we know what's ours to do all the time. There is, as I mentioned in both books, that stillness is very much required to be able to get a sense of what that feels like. And so at the end of the posturing book, that was the action steps that I would recommend, is some sense of contemplative practice or meditation. And that can be done in many, many ways. And I listed those out in there. And certainly there's a lot more to be said about that. But that's your, how do I make sense of, how do I put this into action, is as interesting as it sounds, it's your non-action is probably the way forward, as in slow yourself, spend time in stillness and meditation, and then things can become a bit clearer on what is yours to do. And certainly you feel something. Not usually it's a non-event while you're doing any of this that, well, I don't feel anything of what's going on. But over time, something is happening. And maybe that's the moving into the second half of life, that you feel like there's something going on there. So that's what I would encourage you to do, is to try to regularly practice some meditation, some form of contemplation, or, there's lots of ways for that, as we said. And working that in. So as paradoxical as it is, which is, I think most things find their truth in a paradox, is that our way forward is to actually do nothing. And it'll feel like nothing. Feel like no thing. As Father Richard says, it's no thing. To just sit there and not actively doing anything, but that seems to be the way forward. So that's probably enough for today. I think we're all coming up to 30 minutes on this video, but I'm looking forward to our upcoming Zoom session, and again, listening to your videos and comments to each other. I think they just have been outstanding. Again, if you have comments, questions, please feel free to reach out and let me know. Thanks.